She avoided him all night, and there's a reason. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There was no public argument, no red carpet tension, and no viral moment caught on camera. But behind the scenes at the Golden Globes, Pamela Anderson made a quiet choice that spoke volumes. When she realized Seth Rogen was nearby, she kept her distance, and later admitted it wasn't accidental. Nearly 4 years after Pam and Tommy premiered, the emotions surrounding that series still haven't faded for Pamela. And seeing one of the people behind it, in a room meant for celebration, brought all of that back at once. According to Pamela, Seth Rogen was seated close to her during the ceremony, close enough to notice, close enough to feel uncomfortable, and close enough to remind her of a chapter of her life she never wanted turned into entertainment. This moment matters because it wasn't about a show, ratings, or awards. It was about what happens when someone's real-life trauma is repackaged for mass consumption, and how long the impact of that decision can last. Pamela later explained that being near Seth made her feel uneasy, even unsettled, not because of something he said or did that night, but because of what he represents in her story. Pam and Tommy dramatized one of the most painful periods of her life, the unauthorized release of a private tape that shaped public perception of her for decades. While the series was praised by critics and performed well commercially, Pamela has been consistent about one thing. She was never involved, never consulted, and never supportive of the project. So, when she found herself sharing space with one of its producers, the feelings resurfaced. She described the moment as awkward, not explosive, just heavy. In her words, it felt yucky. And instead of pushing through the night, making polite conversation, or pretending everything was fine, she made a quiet decision. She left early. After appearing on stage with Miley Cyrus to present an award, Pamela didn't stay for after parties or extended celebrations. She went straight home, straight to bed, a subtle exit that, in hindsight, carried meaning. What's especially striking is that Pamela isn't asking for public conflict. She hasn't demanded statements, apologies on social media, or accountability campaigns. Her frustration is far more restrained, and arguably more powerful because of it. She has said that Seth Rogen has never reached out to her. No message, no apology, no acknowledgement of how the series affected her personally. And while she understands that being a public figure comes with scrutiny, she draws a clear line when it comes to deeply personal experiences. Her position is simple. Fame does not cancel the right to dignity. Pamela has explained that while people often say public figures sign up for loss of privacy, that logic falls apart when it comes to someone's darkest moments. According to her, those experiences shouldn't automatically become material for television, especially without consent. And that's where this situation becomes bigger than two celebrities avoiding each other at an awards show. It raises a larger question about storytelling, ownership, and responsibility in Hollywood. When real lives inspire content, who gets to decide how much is too much? And does success excuse emotional fallout? Pamela admitted that, in her mind, she imagined confronting Seth, saying exactly how she felt, telling him what that series represented to her. But, in reality, she chose silence and distance instead. Not because she didn't care, but because she did. She's also been clear that this isn't something consuming her life. She acknowledged that there are far more serious issues happening in the world, and she isn't positioning herself as a victim in need of sympathy. Still, unresolved feelings don't disappear just because time passes. And that's what made the Golden Globes moment so revealing. In a room full of celebration, recognition, and industry praise, Pamela Anderson was reminded of a time when her voice didn't matter, and how that still lingers. She has said she hopes that one day Seth might reach out. Not for publicity, not for headlines. Just a private acknowledgement that the story he helped tell came from a very real place of pain. Until then, she's choosing boundaries. And sometimes, the most powerful statement in Hollywood isn't what you say. It's who you quietly walk away from. What makes this situation even more layered is where Pamela Anderson is in her life now. Over the past few years, she's been actively reclaiming her narrative, on her own terms. Through documentaries, interviews, and carefully chosen projects, she's spoken openly about how misunderstood she felt for much of her career, and how often her story was told about her instead of by her. That context matters when looking at why Pam and Tommy still stings. For many viewers, the series felt like a re-examination of a media scandal from the 1990s. For Pamela, it was a reopening of wounds she never agreed to relive. While some involved in the production argued the show was sympathetic, Pamela has consistently said that intention doesn't erase impact, and that's why the lack of direct communication has lingered. In her recent comments, Pamela didn't accuse Seth Rogen of malice. She didn't suggest the show was created to harm her. What she expressed instead was disappointment, the kind that settles in when someone profits from your pain without ever checking in. That absence of an apology isn't about ego, it's about acknowledgement. She explained that when you're a public figure, people often assume resilience is automatic, that celebrities are immune to embarrassment, exploitation, or emotional fallout. But in reality, those experiences don't disappear just because millions are watching. Seeing Seth at the Golden Globes wasn't triggering because of who he is. It was triggering because of what the moment represented. A system that moved on, celebrated itself, and never looked back to ask how the subject of the story felt. Pamela has also pointed out something many people overlook. Pam and Tommy didn't just retell history. It reframed it for a new generation. For viewers who weren't alive in the 90s, the series became the definitive version of events, even though she had no say in how she was portrayed. That loss of agency is what still sits unresolved. Interestingly, Pamela's reaction wasn't anger. It was withdrawal. She didn't seek confrontation. She didn't create a scene. She removed herself from the environment entirely. That choice reflects growth, but it also reflects a boundary she's learned to protect. And boundaries, especially quiet ones, often make others uncomfortable because they can't be debated or dismissed. The Golden Globes are designed to feel glamorous, validating, and celebratory. But for Pamela, that night carried a reminder that success in Hollywood doesn't always align with fairness. Awards don't measure emotional cost, and applause doesn't erase harm. Still, Pamela was careful to keep perspective. She emphasized that she's doing well, that her life is peaceful, that she's grateful, and that she doesn't want this situation to define her or dominate public conversation. That restraint is part of why her words carry weight. They aren't fueled by outrage, but by reflection. At the same time, her comments reopen an important discussion. Should creators be accountable to the real people behind the stories they tell? As biopics and based-on-true events series continue to dominate streaming platforms, Pamela's experience serves as a cautionary example. Just because something is legal, popular, or critically praised doesn't mean it's emotionally neutral. And as audiences become more aware of the human impact behind entertainment, moments like this one matter more than they might appear. Pamela didn't avoid Seth Rogen out of spite. She avoided him because healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like distance. Whether Seth ever reaches out remains unknown. Whether an apology would change anything is also unclear. But the fact that Pamela still hopes for that acknowledgement shows she hasn't closed the door completely. She's simply no longer willing to carry the weight alone. And in an industry built on visibility, that quiet choice to step away, go home, and rest may be the most honest response of all. What's especially striking is how this moment fits into a much bigger shift happening in Hollywood right now. For decades, stories about famous women were often filtered through spectacle. Scandals were framed as entertainment, personal pain was treated as public property, and consent was rarely part of the conversation. Pamela Anderson became one of the clearest examples of that era, not because of what she did, but because of how others chose to tell her story. That's why Pam and Tommy wasn't just another project to her. It symbolized a pattern she's been trying to escape. When the series premiered in 2022, it was widely praised for its performances and production value. But Pamela made it clear she wasn't involved, wasn't consulted, and didn't approve of the project. She described it as reopening trauma she had worked hard to put behind her. At the time, some dismissed her reaction as oversensitivity, arguing that the show brought context or sympathy. But sympathy without consent is still extraction, and that idea has only gained more traction since then. In recent years, audiences have started questioning who benefits from these retellings, who controls the narrative, who gets paid, and who is left to deal with the emotional aftermath. Once the credits roll, Pamela's Golden Globes moment wasn't loud, but it was symbolic. It showed what happens when the industry celebrates itself without fully reconciling with the people whose lives fueled that success. What's also important is how carefully Pamela chose her words. She didn't accuse, she didn't attack. She used phrases like felt yucky and uncomfortable, which may sound mild, but they describe a deeply personal boundary, one she's clearly learned to respect. Her choice to leave early wasn't about drama, it was about self-preservation. And that's something many people watching can relate to. We've all been in situations where staying felt harder than walking away, where explaining ourselves would cost more energy than it was worth. Pamela simply did that on one of the most public stages imaginable. Meanwhile, Seth Rogen's silence has become part of the story. Not because he's required to respond publicly, but because acknowledgement matters when power dynamics are uneven. Producers shape narratives, subjects live with them. An apology, in this context, wouldn't rewrite the past. It wouldn't erase the series, but it could recognize that impact exists beyond intention. Pamela has said she still hopes for that conversation one day. That detail matters. It shows she's not closed off or bitter. She's open, but on her terms now. That shift is reflected in the projects she's chosen recently. From her documentary to more introspective acting roles, Pamela has leaned into authenticity rather than image. She's no longer interested in being reinterpreted by others. She's telling her story herself, carefully and deliberately. And perhaps that's the real reason this moment resonated so widely. It wasn't about a celebrity avoiding another celebrity at an awards show. It was about boundaries, consent, and the long shadow stories can cast over real lives. As Hollywood continues to mine the past for content, moments like this force an uncomfortable but necessary question. Just because a story can be told, does it mean it should be? And if so, who gets to tell it? Pamela didn't demand answers that night. She didn't confront anyone on camera. She simply chose peace over proximity, and sometimes that quiet decision says more than any speech ever could.